This is an anime about a beautiful and wonderful vampire who unfortunately doesn't shine in the sunlight, but at least he's invincible. And after sleeping for more than 500,000 years, he's decided to live the life of a normal student in order to learn more about today's society. The story begins hundreds of years ago, when we humans were the weakest race and couldn't even protect ourselves from small animals. At the time, humans, as well as being weak and anti-violence, used to be members of animal protection and goes, and were obviously also against weapons. Being the most unsuccessful creatures on the entire planet, everything changed when, one day, they discovered a race of people with superhuman strength, who were so strong that they began to collectively call them noble. At first, these nobles were suspicious of humans, but they soon realized the size of the weakness that each human carried between their asses. And this, combined with the fact that humans gave these nobles immense respect, led to the nobles acquiring the philosophy that they should protect humans, creating a kind of obligatory nobility, obliging every noble to protect a human being at any cost. In this way, the nobles and the humans formed a very special bond, in which the nobles were clearly above mortal humans, but they still had respect and admiration for all humans, because living a very short time, their civilization was always evolving. And more than 800 years ago, the Cartesian trauma of Heisel, affectionately nicknamed Hai, is the being of highest nobility in this world, called the chief of the noble. He fell asleep, and only woke up after someone took him out of his coffin. When he wakes up, he is shocked to see how different this world has become, because technology has advanced so much, and everywhere he goes, he witnesses incredible human creation. But before wandering alone in this world, he meets up with his servant, Frank. His servant is surprised to see his master, and immediately takes him into his house to tell him what has been happening in the world recently. Hai finds it very funny how much the human world has changed, and wants to experience everything firsthand. And Frank is currently the principal of a high school. He enrolls Hai in one of his classes, so that he can spend some time with modern humans and understand the development he hasn't seen in recent years. Hai quickly gets a friend, in this case a red-haired boy called Shin, who is a great martial artist and an excellent athlete. Hai is surprised by the casual way humans manage to address him, realizing that humans seem to have lost the instinct to recognize noble, which makes him believe that humans shouldn't depend on them too much anymore. One evening, while he was having tea with Frank, this unknown piece of shit approached him, introducing himself as M21. The guy has no name. He tells them that he is a modified human, and that he was created by an evil scientific organization called the Union. Yeah, man, the sugar you eat. And according to him, they were created in test groups, which is why they were never given a name and were only called by their serial number. They all had countless drugs injected into their hold, and many tests were carried out on their body, all to test the effect of the drug. At the time, the conditions they were subjected to were so horrible for them that all their friends ended up dying during most parts of the process, except for him and a friend of his, who survived and gained superhuman strength and ability. He says that currently various occult organizations are trying to control the power of the world, using him and other modified people as weapons of destruction, but he finally managed to escape from the Union with his friend. And after that they decided to go their separate ways, to find a purpose for their life. After learning about his abilities and how he ended up saving the lives of some of the school's students, Principal Frank decided to invite M21 to live in his house for the time being. He suggested that M21 work for him, as more people would be sent to kill him, and they could help him deal with these people. The man thinks for a while and asks what Frank wants in return. However, the blonde-haired man laughs and tells him that from now on, M21 only has to act as the school's security guard and devour the pub of any students who try to do something wrong. The next day, the Hai goes to the school and immediately attracts the attention of a horde of girls who are enchanted by his majestic behavior and elegance. It's as if the women can somehow sense that he's a nobleman. That's why I made this beautiful thumbnail for this video. Look how beautiful it is. He enters the classroom and realizes that Shin has a fracture in his hand and is wearing a plaster cast that his friends have scribbled on. So, Hai, wanting to get involved in this strange custom of human being, takes his highlighter and makes some doodles on Shin's plaster. Then he sits down and starts attending classes with them, and even has lunch with the boys, where he insists on eating mud every day, because ever since he tasted this modern delicacy, he can't go back to the food of his time. After class is over, Shin and his friend, a real nerd, start talking about cell phone game and ask Hai if he'd like to join in. However, Hai has no idea what they're talking about. Mobile video games, Hai doesn't know anything about it. Then Shin and the loser explain to him that a cell phone is a very important tool in modern time, because when you have a cell phone you can connect with several people at any time, saying that a cell phone is a device that keeps you from getting bored. Hai can't believe such a thing exists, and during the night he goes to Frank, who was relaxing at the top of the school with M21. He tells Frank about the technology Shin was talking about, and Frank smiles at him. He says that the world has changed a lot since he went to sleep, and that many technologies like this now exist. Frank prepares the latest, high-spec version of a smartphone for Hai, the Ultra Noble Level 999 Plus Vampire Gold cell phone, and the next day, when Hai picks up his cell phone in class, Shin and his friend are surprised to see him using a device, and are happy for him, saying that when night comes, he could do more research on single mothers 5 kilometers away. However, they soon realize that Hai has no idea how a phone is used after all. When Shin asks for his number by email, Hai just looks at it, not knowing what's going on. The loser friend takes the cell phone from Hai's hand and starts teaching him how to use it. He also tells him how to send an email, which Hai learns immediately and starts sending messages to Frank. While having lunch that day, the trio heard a noise coming from the schoolyard, and like good gossips, they decided to check out what was going on. They see that a group of vandals have driven onto school property and are harassing the student. Hai is very intrigued by this, as he has never seen humans fighting each other in his life. One of the hooligans grabbed the janitor and punched him, but Shin ran up and blocked the punch with his injured hand. The man looked at Shin and accused him of trying to steal his girlfriend. The loser asks Shin why he did it. In his defense, Shin says that the woman was just about to fall, and he saved her, but if the grotto is a mongrel dog who has a boyfriend and still fell in love with him, he's not to blame for that alone. The man, however, has no intention of listening to him, and his goons start intimidating people at school. Shin tells him to leave or he'll shit in his own hand and punch them in the face. But before he can do that, the leader of the hooligans starts punching him. Shin dodges most of the punches, but he is cornered and can't retreat and ends up being hit directly in the face by one of his punches. Hai observes all the commotion and looks at M21, who really wants to stop all this, but he's afraid to reveal his superhuman strength, revealing that he's trying to be discreet, as the correct thing to do in a normal human situation would be to call the police. However, the horned man starts kicking Shin and even tries to step on his head, but Shin rolls to the side and the horned man tries to punch him again, but Shin dodges all of his punches, and in a moment of opening, he lands a punch on his enemy. The leader of the vandals gets even angrier and starts throwing strong punches, and as Shin tries to block them with his bruise, his cast starts to come off, and the horned one punches him in the stomach, throwing him over the loser, and with both of them falling to the ground, the horned one advances towards Shin, saying he's going to shit on his face, but he's blocked by the janitor, who tells him to go away, as he won't allow him to shit on his students' faces. But the horned one doesn't give a damn and grabs the janitor by the neck. However, he is interrupted by M21, who calmly walks up to them, ordering them to let the janitor go. The horned one looks at him and tells him to leave if he doesn't want to get shit in his face, saying once again that he won't stop until he shits in Shin's mouth. In response, M21 replies once again, telling him to leave the janitor alone. So the horned one lets go of the janitor and tries his luck with M21. However, M21 uses totally inhuman moves, easily dodging every punch, only to grab his chain and slam his head against the floor. The horned one tries his best to get up, but he realizes that M21 is very strong. M21 doesn't stop there, and tells the horned one not to show up at this school again, otherwise he and his gang of kids will be killed by him personally. This frightens the man, who immediately flees with his entire gang. In the end, all the students scream, celebrating M21's victory, and he is very surprised by this, as he is used to being bullied and tortured, not appreciated as a hero. Rake was watching the whole thing and simply went back inside to continue his work, thinking how interesting it would be to see humans shitting on each other. At least now he has realized that humans have become dangerous, strong and brave compared to the old days. The next day begins, and as usual, Shin arrives late for class. The teacher enters this time with 2 new students by his side. He has no information about the students. He only knows that they are both very beautiful. The short boy with his hair sucked back introduces himself as Regis, while the pretty girl introduces herself as Sarah. At this point, the teacher does the nice thing and tells Shin to show Sarah around the school, which he pretends not to be too keen on. Looking at both of them, Rai immediately realizes that they are nobles, and in response, the 2 new students notice Rai's exceptionally strong aura, which is too strong even for a lord of noble. His aura to both of them is as if they were seeing the aura of a god. After the whole lesson, they sit down for lunch, and as time passes, Shin realizes that these 2 new students seem to be inept some modern thing, just like Rai. Regis tries to use a chopstick, but can't, while Sarah simply uses a spoon, proving that as well as being weak nobles, they are dumb for not having learned anything from the advance of human technology. Later that day, we see Shin, the loser, Regis and Sarah, and Rai returning to Frank's house, where they had been spending time, when Frank came in with the M21. He was surprised and annoyed to see Shin and his friend making a mess of his house, but he knows that they are Rai's friends, so he tells him that they are welcome and goes into the kitchen to simply do the dishes, like a good housewife. When he goes back outside, Shin tells him that neither Sarah nor Regis have anywhere to live in the city, and asks Frank if he can take them in. Frank gets angry with him again, but Rai says he doesn't care, which forces Frank to say he doesn't care either. The next day, a group of henchmen try to pick a fight with Rai and Shin, along with Loser and Sarah. When they just wanted to go home, the enemies surround them in groups, and one of them even pulls a knife on Rai. But Shin tells them not to hurt any of his friends, and that he will go with. Then everyone is taken to the gang's hideout, where they are surrounded by a group of hooligans. And the boss looks at Shin, and he says that he will learn a lesson today. Shin tells Loser to take Sarah and Ryan walk away, while he throws down his bag and prepares to fight. One of the boys runs towards him with the group, but Shin manages to easily dodge his punch, as well as dodging an attack from behind and punching him to the ground. The other man tries to hit him with a wooden stick, but Shin easily dodges and knees him in the face. Two more men try to attack him, but he manages to easily dodge their attacks and delivers a strong counterattack. Unfortunately, while he was being cursed at by several of them, Shin ends up being caught from behind by one of the enemy, while another enemy tries to hit him, and Shin manages to defend himself. But again, a guy tries to choke him from behind, causing a Rai to step forward to save him. But Shin yells at him to back off and uses his skills to push the big guy away. He was being pressured and was about to be overpowered when M21 and Regis arrived on the scene. Regis tries to interfere, but M21 stops, as it wouldn't be nice if Regis showed his power to normal human being. Regis looks at Shin and realizes that he's not giving up even though he's facing several human. In fact, he continues to make an effort to beat up all his enemies. Regis is shocked to see a human defending himself against the people around him, as that was the job of the noble. But M21 tells him that humans have learned to defend themselves. Out of nowhere, one of the enemies tries to use the loser as a hostage, but Shin kicks him before he can reach the loser, and the situation gets worse when the leader of the fags gets tired of it all and pulls out a gun, pointing it at Shin. It was at this point that M21 decided to intervene, appearing in front of the leader, grabbing his hand and pushing him to the ground. Then another extra tries to use a steel pipe to hit him, but M21 simply uses his arm to defend himself against the steel pipe. And then the furious Shin tries to punch the guy in the face with all his might, but he stops just as M21 tells him that this is enough. Shin then walks away and tells the men that if they want to get back at him, they should attack him when he's alone. After he says this, they all start walking back home, and Regis comments on the fact that human beings have become very savage in recent years, to which he responds by saying that he has yet to see what kind of savage and heartless acts humans are capable of. In another beautiful day, everyone sits down to dinner while Regis and M21 exchange insults. As usual, Regis says he hates the fact that M21 gave up his humanity to gain powers over the human, while M21 is forced to hate Regis because he always makes the shaman out to be a traitor to humanity, even though he was literally created in a laboratory. The two are interrupted by Frank, but he's fed up with these profiteers and tells them to clean up the mess they've created. Sarah, showing that she is a true angel in the body of a noblewoman, starts cleaning things up, while Regis argues with Frank while cleaning, asking why Rai doesn't clean anything. Frank quickly ignores him and tries to change the course of the conversation, but the pygmy with the licked head insists and says that Rai should also clean things up. And before Frank could rip Regis' head off, Rai simply got up and went over to him. Frank is terrified at this point, thinking that Rai is going to destroy the whole neighborhood, but to his surprise, he simply walks over to put his empty containers in the garbage can and walks away. Frank lets out a sigh of relief and starts cleaning up, happy that the city has been spared. The next day at school, Frank and Rai have called an M21 into a private room, and Frank informs him that he has opened a separate bank account for the M21. He's surprised and asks why he would do that, and Frank looks at him and says that he's working for them, so obviously he needs a bank account so they can send him his salary. This leaves M21 completely shocked, because before that he was simply used as a weapon and was paid nothing his entire life. This is the first time anyone has offered to pay him a salary. He thanks Frank from the bottom of his heart and goes back to work, ready to finger the butthole of anyone who fucks up. And when he was walking home at night, he was stopped by two men. One of them is an extremely ugly-looking guy, while the other is fat, and judging by his fat look, he's eating a chicken leg. The really ugly guy tells M21 that they have business with him, and calls him by his code name, which is the only one he has. This immediately puts him on his guard, as no one but the syndicate or the union knows his code name. He asks who these scumbags are, and one introduces himself as the Shark, and the other as the Hammer. But to make this video easier, I'm just going to call the fat guy Fat, because he's the only fat guy in the whole anime. After the question, Shark reveals that they work for Da 5, which he immediately recognizes disguises as the syndicate's special operations team. He goes over and asks them why they're in front of him, to which the shark guy replies that they're going to take him with them, and during this simple conversation they end up insulting M21's only living companion. He gets furious, and Shark immediately realizes this and ends up provoking him even more, saying that if it hurts it's because it's true. M21 then transforms into Vowel and sees himself as Deadpool and runs towards the shark to try to hit him, but the shark is too fat and dodges all his attack, only to kick him in the stomach. Luckily, M21 hasn't eaten his dinner. He then steps on his chest and tells him that he's just a useless science experiment that should have been discarded. M21 transforms back into Vowel and attacks him, but the shark jumps back just in time. M21 repositions himself, but the shark doesn't give him time to catch his breath and attacks him with a knife, and M21 narrowly blocks the first attack, but the shark keeps attacking him, making M21's life more and more difficult. He realizes that the shark is much stronger than him, and that if this continues, he won't stand a chance of surviving this fight. The shark finally manages to break through his defense and slashes him on the shoulder, legs, and then applies a special blow that gives him numerous cuts all over his body, breaking him in one piece. He falls to his knees trying to catch his breath, while Gordo calls out to him from behind, telling the shark not to kill him. However, the shark starts to advance, but he stops when he sees Sarah and Regis behind the M21. He looks back and is shocked to see the two of them. He tells them to leave immediately. Regis, however, is confident in his abilities and starts bad-mouthing the shark, who doesn't understand the boy's jokes and tries to attack him, but M21 appears between them and saves Regis. Regis, however, still doesn't care and starts talking again, but this time M21 yells at him to shut up, which surprises him. The shark advances, but is interrupted halfway when a man lands behind M21, telling him to stop. He looks back and realizes that this guy is the leader of Da5, and soon afterwards this man says that M21 will go with them, and he agrees without any resistance, saying that his only condition is that they leave Regis and Sarah alone. After that, Regis and Sarah go back to Frank's house. They then ask where M21 is, and Regis simply doesn't say anything because he's very angry with M21 for stopping him from fighting them. Frank asks Sarah what happened, and she informs him that they were on their way back when they saw M21 with two people she doesn't know. They seem to be fighting, but in the end M21 voluntarily went back with them. Frank thanks her for the information and thinks about what could have happened. He knows that the people Sarah is talking about must be members of the Union or the Union. There are a lot of names and Frank doesn't know any of them. However, Frank also doesn't know if M21 went with them to save Regis Sarah, or if he was actually a spy sent to get information about Hai. And now that he has obtained information, he has returned. Meanwhile, M21 is taken to a house, where he is beaten up by the shark who wants to get information from him. However, Krantz tells him to stop, and asks M21 to tell them what happened to the coffin he was tasked with recovering. When he refuses to answer, Krantz asks if he has been ordered by the Union to keep quiet. This makes M21 realize that they don't seem to know that he betrayed the syndicate and freed the nobleman from the coffin. Shark starts kicking him again, saying that their mission for the syndicate doesn't matter at the moment, as Da5's mission takes priority, and M21, realizing that he could use this situation to his advantage, has decided to pit them against the syndicate. He tells them that he will only give them information if they are willing to make a deal, and Krantz looks at him and says that he is in no position to negotiate. If he wants to, he can simply use the truth serum created by the Union on him, but M21 smiles at him. He says that the truth serum doesn't work on him, and that he'll die before they get any of the information they want. He says that their only way out is to make a deal with him, and Krantz asks what he wants, and M21 replies by saying that he needs information about all his comrades who have died. Krantz, however, can't make that deal because he himself has no information about them, but M21 says he knows that one of the Da5 members is a powerful hacker who can find out anything. He knows that hacking the Union system must be child's play for the hacker. The hacker, called Tao Smile, tells him that he's completely right. Krantz tells him they have an agreement, and he asks about the information, but M21 says he's hungry and wants to eat first, trying to buy as much time as possible. So the shark and Gordo are in charge of looking after him, and he is very well looked after, especially by the shark, who starts hitting him up asking for information as soon as possible. However, M21 tells him that he won't provide any information until he's received his share of the deal. The shark is furious with him and pulls out a knife and threatening M21. He says that if he is lying, he will kill him, but M21 says that he will be going against Kranz's direct orders and will lose all the information they could have obtained from him. Just then, a man with long hair arrives with Tao and tells the shark to back off, and the shark takes out his frustration on his teammate, saying that his hair stinks of shit, and then he scolds the guy with the long hair, who calls himself Takeo, complaining that he left a woman and children alive when his job was to completely clean up a certain area. But Takeo replied that those people couldn't hurt them, and that's why he let them lie. But the shark reveals that after Takeo left, he killed those people anyway, and this infuriates Takeo, who draws his gun and points it at the shark. But Tao quickly jumps up and grabs his arm, telling him not to do anything stupid. The shark simply walks past, saying that he'll get the information from the M21 one way or another. On the other side of the screen, Regis is walking home from school with Shin and Loser, when he suddenly sees Shark and Gordo in the distance on a building, at which point Shin turns to talk to him, but Regis disappears completely and finds Gordo and Shark in an abandoned park. Shark comments on Regis' courage and says that he is extremely stupid, but in return Regis says that his mother must be so fat that she gave birth to a child with a shark face, which causes Shark to throw his knife at Regis. Regis easily grabs her in the air and tells the shark that a weakling like him can't do anything. The furious shark rushes towards him and tries to attack him with his knife, but Regis manages to easily dodge his attack, and suddenly he uses an ability that causes his whole body to freeze. Regis tries to parry a direct blow, but the shark manages to block it easily, resulting in only a scratch on his face. He tries to attack him again, but Regis again uses a time stop before trying to hit him, but this time the shark also manages to dodge the attack, saving his vital point. The two face off again, but the fat man throws a bunch of small explosives that force them both to retreat. He throws a pill to the shark and tells him not to take it too easy with that sucky hair. Even though he's reluctant, the shark puts the pill in his mouth, and suddenly his muscles start to grow, and his aura changes completely. His speed becomes absolutely fast, and in the blink of an eye, he appears behind Regis and tries to attack him, but Regis jumps back, but the shark appears behind him again, and he dodges when Regis tries to punch him. Then he tries to throw a knife at Regis, which is easily blocked, and Regis tries to use his special ability again, but it doesn't work this time. The shark then laughs at him and says that his trick won't work anymore, and this makes Regis furious, and before he could react, the shark took a blow that made him scream in pain. At that moment he realizes how powerful Regis is. He could easily have been killed by that blow, but Regis avoided killing him, and unfortunately this fight won't be won by Regis, because Gordo is holding Shin and the loser hostage. Gordo orders Regis to come with them in silence, which is how Regis is also captured by them. After that, in the place where M21 was, he is taken to a different room, where he sees Regis, Shin, and the loser lying on the floor. The shark tells M21 that if he doesn't open his mouth, he will kill them. And meanwhile, at Frank's house, Sarah approaches him and Rai, and informs them that something has happened to Regis. Sarah explains that she and Regis have a very strong neural connection, and that because of this, they can both feel each other. And according to her, this connection is only lost when one of them is unconscious or died, which means that Regis is unconscious or dead at the moment. She thanks them for their hospitality and says that she will leave to find Regis. At that moment, Frank tells Rai that Shin sent him an email saying that he and his friend Loser were going to visit them, but they haven't shown up so far and aren't even answering calls. And this makes Rai get up, and he and Frank start following Sarah. Back at the safe house, Regis finally wakes up and finds himself surrounded by members of the Da5 faction. It's at this point that Shark uses M21 to reveal any information he has while putting a knife to Regis' throat, but M21 turns his face away, saying that Regis is just an insufferable brat who he doesn't care about, and that they're free to do whatever they want. However, Regis has a very sharp tongue and starts insulting Shark, which results in a swift kick to his face. Shin also wakes up and is shocked to find himself surrounded by these men, but his attention immediately turns to his unconscious loser friend. He tries to wake him up, and when he does, Shin looks around and sees Regis being badly beaten and M21 there too. He asks M21 what's going on, but he doesn't answer. Regis, however, butts in, saying that M21 has traded his humanity for power, so they can't expect much from him. He and the loser are very confused by this and try to talk to M21, but he refuses to answer. The shark then grabs Shin and puts a knife to his throat, trying to get an answer out of M21. But he won't budge, claiming that he only knows the boys as random high school students who attend the school where he has been posted as a security guard. The shark is furious at this and kicks Shin to the ground, then starts stomping on his head. And a while later, it is revealed that all the people who have seen their faces will have to die. However, Tal tells him that they can simply use one drug or another to be able to erase their memory, but Krantz intervenes, saying that the children will have to die, causing them both to shut up. The shark is happy to hear this, and pushes Tal to go towards the loser, telling him to kill him, but Shin grabs his leg and won't let go. He gets rid of Shin and decides to kill the loser, but Regis comes between them. However, he's still stuck with the special gem that interrupts his power, and the shark tells him to get out of his way, but Regis, as usual, ends up swearing at the shark's mother, making him angry again, which results in a big face in Regis' face. He lunges at the boy again and grabs him by the hair, but before he can hurt him, Shin decides he's had enough and jumps up to attack the shark, and the shark, thinking that Shin is just any other normal student, decides to simply punch him in the face, but Shin dodges the punch and lands another punch on his face. This causes the shark to knock Regis to the ground and turn to Shin, grabbing him by the throat, saying that he will choke him to death. The loser immediately runs up to him and grabs his arm, trying to get him to let go and begging him not to kill him. But the shark doesn't care and continues choking Shin, to the point where the boy's body goes limp and he falls unconscious. Regis can't do anything but watch because of his handcuff, but suddenly M21 decides enough is enough and rushes over to the shark, transforming back into Wolverine and cutting off his right arm, forcing him to let go of Shin and saving his life. Meanwhile, Sarah has arrived at the safe house and walks towards the entrance, where she is blocked by Gordo, who asks her what her job is here with a very ugly smile. Sarah calmly tells him to get out of the way, but Gordo realizes that she is one of those beings with special powers and immediately drops a bunch of bombs on him. He smiles, thinking that he has hurt Sarah, and when the dust clears, he sees her silhouette and feels an intense pain in his torso. It's at that moment that he realizes he's been cut, and he didn't even notice it happening. He then decides that this is not a good place to fight, and drops a few more bombs on her before disappearing. Rai and Frank also follow her, but instead of going through the main entrance, they land on the roof. There they are met by Takeo, who was just waiting for them to arrive. He asks why they're here, and Frank tells Rai to go ahead, as he'll be dealing with this rude child. That said, he manifests his power in his fists and sets out to attack Takeo. However, Takeo is not to be underestimated, as he carries a briefcase with multiple functions and can use it to defend himself and attack Frank. Frank mocks Takeo's weapon of choice, creates a bunch of dark energy fragments, and throws them at him, who again uses his briefcase as a shield. Frank decides to go even further and cuts the entire roof in two. However, when the dust clears, Takeo shoots him with his sniper, but Frank manages to dodge easily and runs towards him once again, but is forced to retreat when Takeo uses his shield to attack him. He then tries again to use his dark energy, but Takeo manages to aim his second hidden pistol at his head, trying to kill him. Frank then dodges, and Takeo pulls out two pistols and starts shooting at him, forcing Frank to dodge. Frank quickly uses a very strong blow full of dark energy, but Takeo dodges it and falls to the ground. He then realizes that if the fight goes on like this, Frank will get the better of him, so he takes that damn pill and puts it in his mouth. When he consumes it, he undergoes a metamorphosis similar to that of his friend, and changes color, doing the cultural appropriation thing. Frank tries to attack him again, but before he can move an inch, Takeo simply jumps up behind him and points a gun at his head. Meanwhile, M21 knows he won't be able to defeat Shark Face, but he's going to do his best. Their fight continues. The shark kicks M21 backwards, then swings its blade in the air, cutting through M21's clothes and showing off its toon body. The shark becomes insecure with his own body and decides to kill M21 once and for all. Their battle then continued, fighting only to the point where the shark decides to use one of his strongest blows, already knowing that M21 won't get out of the way, because if he does, all those he tried to defend will die, and M21 does exactly what he expected, and takes most of the owner, which leaves him bloodied, and he falls to his knees. The shark walks towards him and tells him to give up, but he remembers that he said he was going to kill M21, so he raises his knife to end the fight. However, Regis manages to free himself from his handcuffs just then, and appears in front of M21. He punches the shark in the stomach and throws him against the wall. Regis tells him to back off and prepares to fight him, and the shark immediately gets up and uses his pill, as he knows he's no match for Regis in his normal form. However, Regis seems to be furious, as he doesn't give a damn about his transformation. He just goes ahead attacking and throwing him away. The shark then kneels down and Regis goes to him to finish the job. But before he can deliver the final blow, Krunts gets in the way, causing Regis to fall back. He also puts in a pill and asks the shark if he can stand up. The shark gets up happily, thinking that together with Krunts, they will end this fight once and for all. But to everyone's surprise, Krunts puts his hand into the shark's body and drains it completely, making it more powerful than it already was. Regis looks at him with disgust and uses his magic blast against him, but it doesn't work against Krunts. He's too strong, which leaves Regis shocked. He immediately advances against Krunts, applying a magic punch, but Krunts dodges and smashes his head against the ground. Regis lies down on the ground, and Krunts, fed up with everything, starts to move towards the M21. But Regis says he's not finished yet, and gets up once more to charge another magical blast at Krunts. The blow was much more powerful than the previous one, making him gasp. But when the dust clears, he is horrified to see that Krunts is completely fine. He immediately runs towards Regis, and gives him an uppercut so hard that he crashes into the ceiling and falls unconscious. He starts walking towards the M21 again, but stops when he sees a mysterious figure walking towards him. Meanwhile, Frank was with Takeo above the roof, and Takeo has Frank in his sights, and while he could have his head blown off, Frank was thinking about whether or not he should unleash his true power. It turns out that Riley told him not to release his real powers without his consent, but he also realizes that if he doesn't use his powers, he'll lose this duel. But for him, following his master's order is the most important thing. However, Takeo ended up using the wrong words at that moment, telling Frank that after he kills him, he'll go after that idiot who went in there. This fills Frank with rage, causing him to release a frightening aura, which even begins to burn the gun that Takeo had in his hands. He quickly walks away, confused by what was happening. And then Frank tells him that the biggest mistake he's made so far in his life was bad-mouthing his master Riley. And by the time he got his anger under control, he'd already unleashed his true power, and now he blames Takeo for it. He says that he too will have to pay for it. Just then, a giant swirl of dark energy envelops the sky, turning everything purple, and then with lightning speed, a spear made of dark energy pierces Takeo's body, pinning him to the ground. Frank then uses his magical energy to corrupt his weapon, but he throws it away in time to save himself. But Frank has several more spears at him. Takeo then runs to try and dodge, but one of them hits him in the leg again, making him fall to his knees. Frank walks towards him and mocks him for talking too much, as he is very weak. This provokes Takeo, and he tries to shoot Frank, but only gets another spear in his arm. Frank finally gets tired of playing around and creates a bunch of magic spears in the air and throws them at Takeo. However, Takeo decides not to give up. He catches his momentum and manages to dodge the spears, while pointing his gun at Frank and shooting him. Frank, however, doesn't even move and lets the bullet get close to him, which completely dashes Takeo's hopes, as he sees that his bullets, when they get close to Frank's face, lose their strength and fall to the ground. After that, Frank blows everything up and makes Takeo scream in pain. Even so, the little shit still resists and jumps on Frank, shooting him in the face. He doesn't cause any damage to Frank's life, but he does manage to cause a single scratch on his face, leaving a small trail of blood on his face. Frank looks at Takeo and asks why he's still fighting so bravely, knowing that he has no chance of winning. But Takeo ignores him and runs towards him once again, and Frank fires a bunch of magic blades at him. Blades that Takeo manages to dodge, and appears behind Frank pointing a gun at his head again. But Frank simply uses his magical energy to grab Takeo's entire body, knocking the gun out of his hand, and then he reveals his enormous power in another cloud of dark energy that forms over them. He converts these clouds into countless spears and throws them all at Takeo, while holding him in place and leaving no room for him to escape. Takeo is stabbed by the spears and his powers are completely exhausted, forcing him to return to his normal state. Sarah also arrives on the scene and watches as Frank goes towards the fallen Takeo, ready to put him out of his misery. But before he could kill him, Takeo looked at Sarah and told her that the children were in danger down there and that they should hurry to save them. He also asked her to bring his sincere apologies to the children who had been taken hostage. And this sudden show of care for those they themselves had captured made Frank reconsider his decision to kill him. Sarah then goes back inside, and while walking around the upper floor, she ends up meeting Gordo, who has taken the pill and is high on drug, now holding an entire rocket launcher in his hand. He fires a projectile at her, but she simply deflects it with her hand, and then summons a weapon that comes directly from her soul, which is a scythe. The fat man fires a projectile at her again, but this time she responds by using her scythe and splitting the projectile in half, as well as cutting the fat man into 2 fat pieces. On the main floor, Rai enters the room and heads towards Krantz, who is the leader of the enemy. The man looks at him and asks who he is, but Rai answers him by asking who the hell gave him permission to speak. Krantz is stunned by this answer, but before he could say anything, a sudden weight was felt in the air, and suddenly both he and the man were pinned to the ground by an extraordinary amount of gravity, which is one of the countless powers Rai has. Krantz tries to move, but Rai asks again if anyone has given him permission to move, causing his enemy to slam his face into the ground without even touching him. Somehow Krantz manages to get up and deliver a blow in the air that destroys the pillars behind Rai, but he himself remains unharmed. The Krantz picks up his twin blades and prepares for a duel. He leaps towards Rai and attacks him with his blades, and this being a very powerful attack, almost the entire area collapses, and there is now dust everywhere. Shin and the others say screw it, Rai's dead. However, as the dust clears, they realize that Rai just managed to completely stop Krantz's attack by grabbing his hand, and then by simply saying the word Shin-da-tensei, he caused Krantz to be thrown towards the wall. Krantz, after witnessing Rai's strength, realizes that even after absorbing the shark, he is still no match for this monster, so he shouts for him to run to him and use a pill so that Krantz can absorb it too. Everyone tells him not to go, but he knows he has a duty to fulfill. He approaches Krantz, ready to take a pill. Krantz is so scared of dying that he shouts at the little shit to do it soon. It's at this point that the loser feels really bad for the guy, because he knows that deep down this guy was a good person. So he begs Rai to save him, because the guy is a good person, but Krantz tells him to turn quickly and then threatens to kill the loser first. That's enough to infuriate him, who uses his magic to wrap ropes around Krantz's neck. He pushes him back and jumps to the side of the group, saying he'll never support him for hurting all those people, but this makes Krantz furious and he's too fat. He reaches him very easily and grabs his face, and just as he was about to throw a powerful punch that would kill him, Rai simply stops him, telling him to stop, and that's enough to make Krantz's antibodies obey his order, and Rai is so nice that after doing this, he goes up to the loser and asks him why he begged him to save the guy's life, and the confused loser apologized, but Rai tells him that they're friends and that he might as well apologize. In order to have a better conversation, he decides to break up the fight first. He raises his hand and suddenly all the drops of blood in the room start swirling around his head. This shocks everyone, especially Regis, who comments that only a superior nobleman could do that kind of magic. Krantz tries to dodge the blood splashing around him, but he realizes that if this continues, he will end up losing, so he decides to run towards Rai. But Rai is already ready to use his magic, and using all the blood in the area, he manages to completely destroy Krantz, erasing him completely from existence. Thus, the battle ends and everyone finally returns home. Their M21 and Takeo are treated, and Frank apologizes for unleashing his powers, having promised he would never do it again. But Rai tells him that he trusts him, and knows that if he broke his promise, it means he had no other choice. Frank is delighted to hear that his master trusts him so much. Later, after breakfast, M21 hears Takeo and the guy talking about the fact that they want to leave the syndicate and pretend that they're dead, and as they have nowhere else to go, M21 hears this and goes up to Frank and bows down to him, begging him to give them shelter. Otherwise, the syndicate will find them and kill them. Frank smiles at him and tells him that he doesn't have to beg for anything, because this is his house too, and of course they can stay there, saying that he'd love to have 2 more security guards at his school. Time passes and the boys are now finally strong enough to go back to school after being cured at Frank's house. The two enter the school gates and find Hai and Takeo dressed in a security uniform next to M21, and because of their cool clothes and refined behavior, they are being adored by the girls as if they were in a K-pop band, and Shin is jealous, and as soon as Hai enters the classroom next to Regis and Sarah, all the girls start to fall in love with him, as if he were the god of K-pop inside the classroom. Shin is still sad about the fact that he doesn't have any girls, and later, when he enters the canteen, he is even sadder, because although Hai is just waiting for his food to cool down, all the girls seem to approach him for no reason. The loser asks Shin what kind of girl he's interested in, but before he can answer, he sees Regis and Sarah entering the class, and observing her elegant behavior, he ends up confessing that he likes Sarah. The loser asks Hai if he'll help Shin go out with Sarah, and he says yes. After that, everyone heads to the corridor behind Sarah, where they find all the girls clustered around the 3 security guards, which makes Shin even sadder. They all meet behind the school, where the loser explains that Shin wants to go out with a girl, but he doesn't know how to do it, as he's never done it before. The 3 men try to run away, since they all have no experience with women, but they are stopped by Shin and the loser, who begs for their help. The loser decides to do some research on the internet, and starts looking at some articles on how to become the god of seduction, while Takeo decides to teach Shin the old way of doing things, but ends up getting embarrassed. Finally, after losing all hope, they end up going to Frank, who proudly tells them about his exploit, saying that he was so seductive that just breathing or farting made all the girls around him go crazy. He tells them that if they want to go out with Sarah, they should know what she likes and what she doesn't like, and that seems to be an excellent idea for them. So everyone ends up going to Regis, and they ask him about Sarah, but he replies that he doesn't know anything about her because they barely speak to each other, and they only work together because they have to, and apart from that, he has no interest in knowing about her. He starts to walk away, when M21 nudges him, saying that he probably doesn't have any women, and that he's never smelled a girl before. This makes Regis very angry, and he says that he's very popular with the girls, and that he doesn't need to prove anything. However, M21 interrupts his attempt to leave by buzzing him in the face. At that moment, Rai himself intervened, ordering Regis to help Shin, and Regis immediately calms down and agrees. Later, everyone goes to the library, where Shin is instructed to write a love letter to Sarah, but this idiot doesn't even know how to write something beautiful. He eventually gets tired of it and leaves, crumpling up the paper and throwing it away. After that, they decide to play to the strengths of Shin, who is very good at athletics. They organize a basketball match, and divide up the whole team to make it look like Shin is a really nice guy. The aim was to let Shin win, but as soon as the game starts, the ball ends up going straight into the hand of Rai, who has never played this game before. He simply picks up the ball, with an extremely threatening aura around him, but instead of dribbling or passing, he simply walks towards them, which becomes a foul and the game restarts. Shin manages to get his hands on the ball and tries to shoot to make a basket, but he ends up missing, and his losing friend passes it to Rai, who simply dodges the ball elegantly, without even moving. The ball keeps going from person to person, and in the end, because of this competitive jerk, the match becomes more serious, and when Tao tries to take the ball away from him, he simply shows his NBA level skills and knocks him down. He tries to make a basket but is stopped by M21, who then engages in a vicious competitive battle with him, in which the two keep trying to outdo each other. Tao decides to intervene and throws the ball towards Shin, but M21 ends up catching the ball and scoring a basket for his team, and this awakens Regis' competitive spirit, and the two keep trying to make basket, one after the other. Finally, the ball goes to Rai again, who throws it to the end with such incredible speed that no one dares to block it, and when it goes towards Shin, he catches the ball and decides not to waste running towards the basket, but just before he can make the basket, Takeo ends up blocking the ball to everyone's surprise and makes a 3-point shot, securing the win for his team. After the defeat, Shin and the losers sit sadly outside the school, and now Shin thinks that nothing can be done, until out of nowhere Regis and Sarah arrive on the scene, and Regis says that Frank needs him and leaves. Sarah, who was waiting behind him, goes over and hands him a note, which was actually the love letter he was trying to write. Apparently, Rai ended up giving the letter to Sarah, and she tells Shin that she likes him best when he's being himself. And after that they all walk together towards Frank's house. But when they get there, the atmosphere seems to be a bit serious, and when the loser asks what's going on, Frank replies that they're going to erase their memory, completely surprising. Shin says it's not true, and claims that there's no such thing as a memory eraser, but Frank replies that they've already rewritten their memories twice before, because the existence of nobles and superhumans like M21. Tao and Takeo can in no way become human knowledge. The two try to fight it, but even Rai says that's the way it has to be. Finally, the two agree, and Rai uses his special abilities to rewrite their memory, and the next day, while Tao, M21 and Takeo were near the front gates of the school, an unknown old man dressed entirely in white appeared. He walks up to the school and tries to pass them, but the 3 men confront him and ask for any kind of identification, but the man simply tells them to stay away, while he emits a very strong aura around him. Just then, Regis and Sarah appear in front of them, kneeling down while the old man asks Regis why these miserable humans are in his way. Regis tries to speak, but is interrupted by the old man who shames him for having forgotten who he really is. Suddenly, Frank arrives from behind and addresses the old man as Jejo Tao, and the old man for some reason is shocked to see Frank here. He takes Jejo Tao back to his house, where Jejo Tao asks if Asera and Regis are living with these humans, and Jejo Tao is horrified when Frank says yes. After all, this is his house, and he can decide who lives here and who doesn't. Grandpa then steps forward and enters the room, while Rai sits sipping his tea as usual. The old man then asks him if he has any memories of the last 800 years, but he replies that during that time he was pampering himself. Jejo Tao then states that Asera and Regis have been sent here to investigate Rai's coffin, because things back in Lusitania, the place where all the nobles reside, have changed a lot. When Rai went into his eternal sleep, many great lords, and even the previous ruler followed him and went into a deep slumber. For nobles, eternal sleep is synonymous with death, and since Rai was the reason why the other lord basically died, the new ruler, who is the daughter of the previous ruler, considered Rai to be a traitor and wants to kill him. Grandpa claims that the clan leaders have reached their youngest generation and tells them that even Asera is one of the clan leaders. Frank mocks the country, which was once so powerful but is now being reduced to nothing. He asks Rai if he would like to return to Lusitania, but Rai simply takes a sip of his tea and replies that he will stay here for a while longer. Jejedal and Frank start talking, and Grandpa opens his mouth to say that he doesn't trust Frank because of what he did a long time ago. At that moment, the flashback to what happened a long time ago comes on strong, and we see Frank when he was known as the Noble Hunter. In the flashback, Frank tortures some lower-ranking nobles in order to get more information out of them. The nobles seem shocked to see a human with so much power, but Frank simply states that he is there to make sure the nobles don't think they can do whatever they want just because they are noble. He leaves the dungeon and feels a huge explosion, realizing that a group of nobles have invaded his mansion. He rushes out while the nobles are right behind him, finally cornering him on the edge of a cliff. They order Frank to give up and go with them to the castle, but he refuses and mocks them and uses his mystical powers to destroy the whole group in one fell swoop. When he's finished fighting the weaker one, two of the clan leaders appear before him, one of them being Jejedal and the other being Kersha. They surround him and tell him that he must follow them back to the castle, where the Lord is waiting for him, but Frank simply uses an energy blast, which Kersha manages to dodge. Quickly, Kersha tells Jejedal to wait behind, as he'll take care of Frank on his own. He lunges forward, delivering a quick uppercut, which fortunately Frank manages to block, but the impact still knocks him into the air. Frank uses his shadowy abilities to send 1,000 spears towards Kersha, but he manages to dodge. The two engage in hand-to-hand combat once again, and reach a stalemate, but Frank pushes him back, forcing Kersha to use his soul weapon. Every vampire clan leader uses a fucking thing like that. Grandpa seems surprised that Frank is strong enough to force Kersha to appeal, and even with his enemy appealing, Frank remains firm and strong, saying that he has killed several nobles who used these shiny toys. He laughs in the face of Kersha and his enemy, saying that his guns stink. That said, he summons his own dark weapon from the sky, which smells of the noble's blood. Having said that, Frank slices the air with his weapon, forcing the two nobles to dodge, while the scenery behind them is cut to pieces. He walks towards them once again, saying that they need to learn that they can't do whatever they want to humans, just because they're powerful, and launches another attack, which this time is intercepted by Kersha. Kersha asks what the hell he's talking about all this time, since nobles are obliged to protect humans at all costs. But Frank tells her that not all nobles are very noble people, as many of them use their power to take advantage of defenseless women and children, and his goal is to teach these nobles that humans are not as defenseless as they think. He unleashes even more of his latent power, pushing the two nobles back, but his weapon begins to take control of his body, causing him to lose control of himself. Grandpa tells Kersha that if they don't defeat him soon, this bastard with this dark power will cause a lot of destruction. So they both join forces and run towards Frank, using their soul weapon. At that moment, a huge explosion occurs, and when the dust settles, they realize that Frank has escaped, leaving a gigantic trail of blood behind him. At the time, Frank manages to regain control of his body again, and he ends up entering a nearby mansion, and on entering one of the rooms, he ends up finding himself with a skin ray inside, all sleek, next to the window. Frank immediately thinks that he has entered the house of some rich landowner, not knowing that Rai is the strongest nobleman in the region, and immediately tells Rai that he is there to start his job as janitor of his house. Rai confirms that he is the owner of of the house and says that there is no one else living there but him. Suddenly, the gate opens, and Jijo, Tell, and Kersha enter the room, and immediately bow to Rai, apologizing for their behavior, before telling him that the Lord of the Nobles has ordered them to capture this human. Rai looks at them, then at the wounded Frank, then uses his magic to transform Frank's clothes into those of a butler, and tells Kersha and Jijo Tell that from now on Frank will work for him, and that he doesn't want Frank to be bothered for a long time. Jijo Tell and Kersha bow again, and promise that they will pass this information on to the Lord of the Noble. After that, 5 years passed, and we see that Kersha regularly trained with Frank to teach him how to control his energy better. But every time Frank ended up losing because he didn't use all his strength, and every time he used it, he lost control. Now that so much time has passed, Grandpa tells Rai that it would be nice if he let the Lord of the Nobles have a talk with Frank, and finally Rai agrees and orders Frank to meet the Lord at once. Frank is escorted to the Lord's chambers, where he is surrounded by a group of nobles who despise him. The Lord seems to be very impressed with Frank, because according to him, Rai wouldn't let anyone near him, and for some reason, he accepted Frank, hiring him as his subordinate and protecting him. The Lord says he's surprised that Frank has been with Rai for so long, and says that the bond between them even makes him jealous. Frank looks at the Lord and says that none of the nobles have really tried to get to know Rai, which is why he doesn't like anyone else. The Lord laughs and asks Frank why he hasn't drunk Rai's blood yet. Frank replies that he still has his dignity as a human being, and that he doesn't want to give up his life to the servitude of a nobleman. The Lord tells him that if he creates a blood pact with Rai, he will be able to control his power, and he will no longer be hunted by anyone. But Frank maintains his strong opinion, saying that for the moment he won't make a pact with any nobleman. Just then, one of the red-haired nobles speaks up, telling the Lord that he cannot allow this man to make a blood pact with Rai, as he has killed countless nobles before. But the Lord replies that Rai's happiness comes first, before anything else for him. Yes, the Lord is Rai's puppy. Wow. After that, while Frank was on his way back, he ended up meeting Grandpa. He asks him if he'd like to train a bit, but the Jejitu refuses. Frank was about to go back when that red-haired nobleman from before and some of his companions approached him, and the red-haired man came up saying that he could very well fight Frank. After that, both Frank and Ruaven enter a battle arena, and when it all kicks off, Ruaven seems to have the upper hand as he continues to dominate Frank with every attack he launches, but Frank gets up again and summons his dark spear. The guy with the red hair attacks once again, but this time Frank manages to defend himself. However, the guy with the red hair increases his intensity and manages to push him against a rock. Frank is furious with him and ends up using all his power along with spear, but ends up losing control of himself and becomes furious. And when he was going to break into the red-haired guy, Kersha and Grandpa interrupted him. They stood in front of the guy with the red hair, telling him to back off because he's no match for Frank in this form. Frank, in his furious form, uses a huge magical explosion, which is suddenly interrupted by Rai and the Lord himself. Rai walks towards Frank, and as he uses another blast, Rai manages to stop it, but he is scratched on the cheek. He then uses his blood magic to create a tornado around them, while Frank lunges forward with his spear, but Rai simply blocks it with one hand and then touches Frank's face, returning him to normal. A while later, Frank wakes up in bed and quickly gets dressed to go serve Rai. When he sees Rai, he doesn't say anything and simply asks for a cup of tea, and while he's preparing the tea, Frank uses a knife to cut himself and spills a few drops of blood into the tea and then hands it to Rai, who drinks it on purpose, and so Frank finally forms a pact with Rai. Then the flashbacks end, and we see Frank telling Grandpa that Rai doesn't want to go back since he's very happy here, where he's surrounded by friends and is exploring a world he didn't even know existed. Grandpa hears everything and says that he'll be back to inform the current lord about these events. He also allows Regis and Sarah to stay here and then leave. But a few days later, while the trio were patrolling the perimeter, they suddenly sensed something strange. It seemed that someone was controlling a group of students, as they began to act strangely. Rai, Regis, and Sarah also sensed the presence of another nobleman. The trio finally confront the invader, who turns out to be a young nobleman, who seems to be confused by the fact that the trio hasn't been affected by his mind control, and before any of them can act, he appears behind M21 and stabs him in the back with his bare hand, then walks away before he can attack him. M21 immediately falls to the ground, while the boy looks disgusted by the bloodstain on his hand and wipes it off on his handkerchief. Before he can do any more damage, Regis and Sarah arrive to tell him to stop. The boy called Rai looks back and seems very happy to see Sarah. He asks her if she has thought about his proposal, but Sarah doesn't answer. He tells her that he was released from his confinement today, saying that he hasn't stopped thinking about her for a single second since he was arrested because he destroyed an entire area when she rejected. Regis tries to butt in, but Rael simply grabs his throat and threatens to rip his life out, until Sarah goes over and asks him to let him go. And then he follows his lover's request and throws Regis away as if he were a rag doll. He looks at Sarah, waiting for an answer, but Sarah simply rejects him, and before he can threaten anyone else, she tells him that if he doesn't leave, she will contact her older brother once again. Rael decides to leave for now, but before he does, he threatens Regis' life if Sarah doesn't come to him, and runs off. Tao and Takeo start looking after M21, as he has lost consciousness and is in a fatal condition after receiving such a deep wound. He is taken to Frankie's house, where he is kept in a special life support capsule while being constantly monitored. Tao and Takeo tell the whole incident to Frankie and Rai, who seem perplexed by this new problem. Frankie takes Tao and Takeo for a checkup, examining their entire body, and in the end he tells them that they're both fine, and adds that their bilubalu is quite small, and they're both quite sad, but not because their bilubalu is small, but because they've been beaten up once again. Frankie looks at them and says that the boy is a pure-blooded nobleman from a very strong clan, and that neither of them has ever stood a chance against him. But the two are still sad and ask him for a way to gain more strength, as they don't want any of their companions to be hurt again in the future. Before walking away, Frankie smiles at them and says he'll see what he can do. While Rai was drinking tea, he suddenly felt Sarah's presence fading away. Yes, she had run off to meet Rael on her own. He gets up and goes outside, where he finds Frankie kneeling on the ground, telling him that he will take care of Rael, and Rai says that he doesn't need to make an effort. Rai tells him that right now, Rael is much stronger than Frankie or anyone else in their house, but Frankie still insists, saying that he can handle Rael, and Rai ends up listening to him. But before he lets him go, he removes the silo he put on Frankie so that he can use his full potential now without any problem. Frankie reaches the top of the building just in time, because after being rejected by Sarah once again, Rael was about to attack her. But Frankie uses his spears of magic to block his path, forcing him to retreat. Frankie walks towards him, asking him why he came to this country, but Rael doesn't listen to him and immediately rushes to attack him. However, his wild blows are in effect, as they pass straight through Frankie without causing any damage. Frankie then says that he made a big mistake by hurting M21, as he was under his protection, and now Rael will have to answer for it. After saying this, he starts channeling his dark energy and throws a bunch of spears at him, but Rael manages to dodge and moves away. Frankie moves on and continues attacking Rael, while Rael tries to run at high speed, but is shocked to see that Frankie, a mere human, is able to match his speed while still continuing to throw spears at him. In response, Rael decides to split himself into 3 images of himself and attacks Frankie all at once, but he simply covers his surroundings with a pile of thorns of dark magic, which ends up impaling the young nobleman, seriously injuring him. In response, Rael draws his soul weapon, ready to use all his power, and Frankie doesn't even react, taking some damage. But to Rael's surprise, he simply starts laughing, because according to him, this fight was becoming boring. Frankie summons his dark spear and throws several thorns at Rael, but he simply split. However, Frankie is able to ward off the fake copies with his dark thorn, but Rael uses his weapon to cut through the air, causing a lot of damage to the buildings behind Frankie. He continues to attack Frankie, while Frankie simply dodges and retreats, until Regis arrives and intervenes with his own energy blast, and then Sarah jumps in to try to hit him with her scythe, but Rael dodges, while being shocked by Sarah's behavior. He asks Sarah if she really hates him that much, and she tells him that she doesn't want to see his face again. This infuriates him, and he takes a parchment given to him by the Lord Ruler of the Noble, and by order of the Lord Ruler of the Nobles, he orders Sarah to follow him and to appear in front of the Lord himself, because that was a royal order, and Sarah can't refuse and ends up going after him. After that, both Regis and Frankie return home, where Frankie tells Rael about the events, and they decide to go to that place, that country there, Macedonia, Lusitania. Before leaving, Frankie summons M21, the one called Eutyqueo, to give them a special drug that he has created, which will release their latent power, making each of them much stronger. They ask why he's giving them this drug, and he replies that he's going on a trip with Roz and Regis, and that during this trip, he'd like them to stay here and make sure everything is going well. They protest and say they want to help too, but Frankie refuses and leaves. Frankie then prepares the plane, and they all travel to that crazy place over there, full of nobles for Rai to beat up. Regis asks Frankie where they're going to land, as he knows there's no airstrip there, and Frankie just smiles at him and tells him they're going to get a little wet. That said, their jet crashes and they end up walking through a dark forest, already planning their plan of attack, until Regis interrupts them and tells them that they are entering forbidden territory. Frankie and Rai seem confused by this, but Regis explains that the previous lord asked that no one ever passed through these forests, and Frankie simply laughs and tells him that Rai's mansion is located at the end of this forest, and that he simply didn't want anyone to intrude on his life, and that because of this, The Lord told everyone not to go near there. They finally enter the mansion, and Rai senses a strong aura coming from inside. Frankie and Rai move forward to inspect the place. They pass through the familiar-looking corridors until they come to a giant door, and when they open the door, they see a giant, magnificent sword. Frankie immediately recognizes it as the Lord's only weapon, and Rai barely notices it and decides to go back to the back room. Meanwhile, Regis hears a lot of noises in the jungle and goes off to investigate, whereupon he comes across a group of low-ranking nobles who were searching the forest for the occupants of the crashed plane. He quickly covers his face with a mask and goes over to them, knocking them out one by one, but ends up being overwhelmed by the sheer number of them, when suddenly a group of nobles are shot and killed by Take and M21, who, incredible as it may seem, are hiding in the treetop. Regis takes everyone to Frankie and Rai, where they reveal that they ended up hiding inside the plane because they wanted to help Rai and Frankie. Whatever the fuck they were going to do, Rai looks at them with a smile and says that his house has a lot of empty rooms, so he doesn't mind. They decide to split up into teams so that Rai can get to the current Lord's palace without any delay. Rai and Frankie walk together, while Regis and M21 run alongside each other like rivals and companions, and to get rid of any enemies in the way. Both M21 and Regis are receiving cover and information from Tal and Take, who are hiding among the trees, ready for any kind of trouble they might encounter. While running through the forest, they suddenly spot a light sky, and it's none other than Rail himself who is descending. Angry with Regis for having followed them here, he tells them both to leave immediately, but obviously they both refuse, ready for a battle. On the other hand, Sarah, who has been sent back to her cell as a prisoner, has escaped and is running towards the Lord's chamber to prevent her from executing Grandpa for treason. However, she is stopped by a red-haired woman who blocks her path and tells her to go back to the cell, and if she does, she won't alert the Lord to her action. But Sarah refuses, saying that she would rather die than let Grandpa be executed. The red-haired woman immediately hits her with one of her magical blasts, but in the midst of the rising smoke, Sarah hits her back with her own attack, which she quickly dodges. The two go back and forth until Sarah decides to get serious and summons her weapon, which forces her enemy to do the same. Fighting goes on. Fighting comes on. Fighting between women. Something beautiful to watch. Very beautiful indeed, but unfortunately Sarah is being dominated. After all, her enemy is much more experienced, and after that Sarah is taken prisoner. And on the other side of the screen, Regis is told that Sarah is in prison because of his family. All because his grandfather betrayed the trust of the current Lord, which ended up with Sarah being put in a cell too. And this ends up affecting Regis, who loses concentration, and Rail takes advantage of this to attack him immediately. But before he could hit Regis, M21 intervenes and tries to scratch Rail's face, but he dodges the attack and backs off. M21 brings Regis back to reality, telling him to concentrate on saving Sarah and his grandfather, while he takes care of that damned blonde. Regis tells him that he can't deal with Rail on his own, but M21 reassures him and tells him to leave. Rail was itching to make a joke, but before he could do so, M21 advanced towards him with surprising speed, and although Rail tried to dodge, M21 managed to scratch him in the face, which surprised Rail and Regis. Tao tells Regis to go ahead, because Frank has given them some 100% pure trembolo, and with that they are unbeatable. Rail is now furious that a mere human has managed to hit him. He advances on M21 and tries to attack him, but is stopped by bullets sent towards him, fired by the enemy's greatest marksman, Takeo. Rail gets even angrier, challenging Takeo and Tao to come out of hiding and fight like real men, but they simply ignore him, proving that they are not real men. Tao tells M21 that this is a good time to try to provoke him, so that he loses his temper and makes even more mistake. And M21 is more than used to annoying these nobles, thanks to his experience with Regis, and starts mocking Rail, saying that if he had breasts he would be a beautiful woman. The nobleman gets annoyed, but he's always been an irritant. Then nothing changes, and he continues attacking while trying to dodge the bullets. But one of the bullets ends up grazing him, causing him to retreat. Soon after, he ends up falling into a trap set by Tao, and when the trap is activated, everyone thinks that Rail has failed this time, but M21 is shocked to see that Rail is still standing, and now Rail's anger has reached its limit. He pulls out his two soul blades, determined to give it his all against these humans. Ra and Frank notice this light show in the distance, and Ra tells Frank to make sure the boys are okay, while he goes on to meet the Lord of the castle alone. Rail uses the blades of his knife to hit M21, who takes the blow and starts bleeding all over. Takeo opens fire to cover him, but Rail simply blocks the bullets with his gun, saying that all this nonsense is useless now. Takeo and Tao decide that the Vietnamese tactics won't do any more good, so they climb down from the tree and run towards the M21. Rail was there exercising his leg by kicking him in the face, and before he could end M21's life with a stab, Tao entered the fray by blocking his attack with his whip. Takeo, like a true military man, starts blowing everything up, but Rail manages to use his super speed to dodge all the attack, and uses an overhead smash to throw them away before going over to them and starting to kick their faces. M21 grabs his feet from behind, but Rail simply starts kicking his head too, and before he could kill them. However, another nobleman appears at Rail's side, who turns out to be the current leader of their clan, Rail's older brother and the eldest son of the Kersha clan, both being sons of the one who once fought and trained with Frank. The current bearer of the Kersha name asks Rail what's going on, and before Rail can begin to tell him how he's been wiping out his enemies, Frank suddenly arrives behind them. Rail recognizes him immediately and tells his brother that this is the blonde who attacked him when he was trying to take the chair with him. Right before he could complete his sentence, the furious Frank stabs him with hundreds of thorns right in front of them, saying that he doesn't want to play any more games, and that this could be their first life or death battle. But he's been through this kind of battle countless times. The clan leader tells Rail to back off, because Frank is way beyond his capabilities, and before the fight even starts, he takes his weapons out of his back, ready to fight Frank at full capacity. Frank tells him that he has already fought his father, and that the man could only beat him with his limited power. But with his unleashed power, he never stood a chance. And since talking is not an option, they both advance, clashing their blows and creating a huge explosion. And after a bit of vibe, the leader strikes Frank, but he manages to block his attack, creating a huge smokescreen that dissipates, and Frank realizes that the leader of the Kersha clan is nowhere to be seen. It turns out that the Kersha clan has always been made up of ambush specialists, and the current clan leader seems to be as good as his own father, as Frank can't even sense his presence. The enemy attacks Frank from his hidden position, which scratches him, but also gives him the general direction of his older brother. And he leaps into the air, only to then attack the entire surrounding area, revealing the position of his enemy, who leaps into the air to save himself. Their enemy quickly splits into several illusions and attacks Frank, but he manages to fend them all off at the same time. But Rail, the little snob, ends up attacking the trio, and in trying to block his attack, Frank ends up being hit by the clan leader's attack and is injured. However, Rail's older brother reprimands him for interfering and apologizes to Frank, saying that this little shit didn't get an education from his own mother, and that if he hadn't intervened, Frank would have been able to fend off his attack without suffering any damage. And to make things even, he uses his gun to cut himself as well. That done, he attacks Frank again, but after a bit of a struggle, Frank manages to stab him in the stomach, pushing him back. Rail gets worried and offers his guns to his brother, who refuses them, saying that they're gay, and that he'll fight Frank on his own. On the other side, Rai enters the Lord's chamber, just as Grandpa was kneeling with his tail tied, and he was about to be executed by the new Lord. However, she stops when Rai enters, changing the color of her clothes midway, like a real Barbie. Rai ends the show completely, telling Lord that she can't kill Grandpa because he forbids it. One of the white-haired clan leaders, who seems to be a simple hot-headed fool, runs towards the guy who is literally the god himself. He leaps into the air and fires a few air blows at Rai, but they do nothing against it. The white-haired fool tries to attack Rai again, hitting him from every possible direction, while Rai doesn't even defend himself, as his attacks have no effect on him. Finally, he stops his attacks and uses his magic to simply throw him away. This excites the woman from before, who prepares to attack him, but Rai simply absorbs her magic and sends it back. While one of the young leaders forms a wall to defend them, the boy uses his shield to create a small box around him that gets smaller and smaller. She was about to crush Rai, but he simply walked right through her without breaking a sweat. All three get up and stand in front of the Lord, but Rai simply uses his mind control to make them bow to his will. Everyone is shocked to see his ability. It's at that moment that someone remembers that Rai is the one who is above a lord, being a true noble, the only one who can punish a lord. The Lord steps forward and tells everyone to stay back, as she will deal with him now. She picks up her sword and attacks Rai, who simply blocks her magic, and uses a magic of his own, which the Lord dodges before trying to hit him head-on with her sword. But Rai simply stops her with his hand and pushes her away. She gets up again and throws a blow at him, which is blocked by the air around. He tells Lord to use his full potential. This infuriates her. She uses all her magical abilities to attack him, using her most powerful attack. However, to her chagrin, Rai simply blocks this attack, breaking her magic, which ends up completely crushing her battle spirit. spirit. She falls to the ground crying and saying that her father never loved her. Everyone again tries to attack Rai, but he defeats them all again and again, and finally uses his special ability to finish them all off. In a moment of inspiration watching everyone fight, the Lord decides to use her supreme ability once again, which neutralizes Rai's attack to the point of a scratch on the cheek, and he starts to fall to the ground exhausted, but is grabbed by Friend himself. The fight ceases, and Rai picks up a sword, which is very similar to the one the current Lord had. The two swords combine, and a fairy emerges from the sword, who turns out to be Hazuki's father. Her father tells her that it wasn't Rai who killed him. He left his life behind on purpose, so that she could guide all the young people, properly leading the nobility towards a better future. But somewhere along the way, the girl's jealousy got the better of her, and she started blaming Rai for everything. And along with her, all the other nobles blamed him too. He ends the conversation by saying that he trusts Rai to look after Hazuki, and before disappearing, he says that he will always love her. Grandpa looks at her and apologizes for hiding the truth from her, as he was instructed to do so by her own father. And before she could say anything, one of the clan leaders arrives with Regis in hand and throws him in front of her, saying that he has something to say. Regis kneels down in front of her and says that her grandfather is not a traitor, and that if she wants to execute her grandfather, she should execute him too. But Hazuki simply hugs the old man, saying that she's sorry for everything and that he's not to blame for anything. In the end, it seems that everything was resolved amicably. The Lord came to respect Rai, not just her, but all the clan leaders who didn't know him. And after all that, our main characters finally return to Japan, starting their lives again as normal people, living among humans and hiding their supernatural abilities from them. That's the end of the Noblest anime, an anime that could have been continued, but unfortunately wasn't.